My name is Ann Hartness, and I was the head librarian of the Benson Latin American Collection from 2000 to 2008. But I began with the collection in 1970, so I spent 38 years. I began working for the Benson collection in 1970 as a cereals cataloger. Cereals does not refer to grains that we eat for breakfast, but to newspapers and periodicals. And I was hired for that position because I knew Portuguese. I had spent some time in Brazil when I was in my early 20s and had learned Portuguese. And so that was a great asset because they needed someone who knew Portuguese well. And then after about 5 years cataloging, I became the public services librarian for the Benson. And after that, the assistant head librarian, and then later the head librarian. One interesting visitor, probably one of the best known interesting visitors, was Fernando Henrique Cardoso, who was the former president of Brazil and who was a highly regarded president by many people in Brazil. Actually, we mounted an exhibit of his writings because he was a former university professor at the University of São Paulo. And he was very surprised at a lot of the obscure materials that we had, including such things as a campaign broadside from his early campaign as senator in the 1970s, and a paper that he presented at a conference in Peru that was in a dittoed format. I don't know if people today even remember what a ditto format was, but it was a form of copying materials, and it turned out purple print. It used purple ink, and he was very surprised to see that. And we also had many of his books, probably all of them, and also many government documents that were published during the time that he was president, including all of his annual messages to Congress. And it was a great pleasure to give him a tour and to demonstrate to him the depth of our holdings here at the Benson. I actually didn't work directly with Nettie Lee Benson because when I was in the catalog department, which was during the end of her time here, we didn't work directly for the Benson. The number of materials increased because I made annual acquisitions trips to Brazil. Not during the whole time that I was here, but probably the last 20 years. And when you go to a place, you find many more things because we were dependent on book dealers in each country to send us mostly commercial publications. But when you actually visit a country, you can get government publications and things from university academic departments and some privately published things or things from remote parts of the country that don't come to book dealers, who tend to concentrate mostly on São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro.
I know that during the time you were at the Benson, that overlapped some with Fred Ellison, the Portuguese professor who did a great deal to bring Portuguese language and literature to UT. I was wondering if there was any overlap in your mission with his.
Yes. Well, he was a devoted user of the Benson collection, and he also donated many publications that he received on trips to Brazil to the collection. And he also was an honorary member of the Brazilian Literary Academy, the National Academy, and he received all of their publications and he gave them to the Benson and continued to do so even after he retired and wasn't on campus. So he was a much appreciated faculty member because of his interest in helping us. The Benson collection has a very strong collection of U.S. Latino materials. Since we're in Texas, it's focused on Mexican Americans, but it actually includes materials related to a lot of other groups. And I felt that this excellent collection wasn't publicized enough and wasn't widely known in the community, and I felt that people should be taking more advantage of it and using it more. And I thought perhaps if we had an annual event related to some aspect of Latino culture, it would help to promote the collection. And so we began 14 years ago. And in the ensuing years, we've had many different kinds of programs. We've had readings by authors, we've had a cartoonist, movie and TV actor, music programs, artists, photography, and others that perhaps I don't recall right now. But it was that impetus to publicize the collection and to make it more widely known that I felt was so important.
It's a great program, and I think that it, well, I hope it does what it was intended to. It certainly brings people here and makes them aware of the Benson and people who might not have.
Yes, we publicize it throughout the community, and so it does bring people here who have never been here before and who didn't know about the library.
As you know, the relationship between the Benson and Lilas has changed over the years and become, more of a formal partnership. What was the relationship with Lilas during your time here?
It's always been good. The directors of Lilas have always been very supportive. And Lilas has been another source of publications for the library because it receives many publications from institutions throughout Latin America and even throughout the world. And it normally donates those books to the Benson. So, and actually, some of them are intended for the Benson because always people have seen the two as being related, especially since they're in the same building and so forth. And even though they weren't formally related in the past, people didn't distinguish in their minds between the two and assumed that the relationship was closer than it was. And of course, now it is a very close relationship.
What kinds of responses did you get over the years when you said that you were head librarian here or that you worked here out in the world?
Very positive responses. People knew about the Benson, and it always seemed to me that anybody who was anybody in Latin American studies eventually showed up here, either as because they were here on campus for a meeting or to give a lecture or something and they wanted to come to the Benson, or at times they came also to do research, came very deliberately to do research. One group of researchers that I always thought was very interesting were PhD candidates from other universities. A number of times, people actually moved here to Austin for a year or 18 months in order to do research at the Benson. People who were working on their degrees at other universities. But we also have had many faculty members from places far and wide. We've had, I recall, researchers from Japan, India, Cuba, and all of the countries of Latin America, as well as many states of the United States. I made many acquisition trips to Brazil for annually for about 20 years, and I stayed usually for 5 weeks and visited several cities in addition to the major publishing centers like Rio and Sao Paulo. I almost always visited Brasilia also, and then usually one other city, one other state capital usually. And one thing that I found very rewarding was that there were people in many of these places who were either UT alumni or they had been visiting professors at the University of Texas, or they knew about the library they were scholars who knew about the library from other scholars who had had experience with it. And I received an incredible amount of help from all of those kinds of people. They furnished everything from hospitality in their homes to transportation to soliciting books from from friends who they knew had recently written a book. Just all kinds of things, and it was very rewarding to know how much so many people appreciated the Benson collection. I've lived in Rio de Janeiro a couple of times, and I know it very well, and I think it's my favorite city. I spent a year there working for the Library of Congress, the U.S. Library of Congress, as head of an acquisitions office that they have there. And so I got to know its libraries and also traveled a lot throughout the country on their behalf. And sometimes I was able to do things on behalf of the University of Texas also at the same time. And so I think Rio is my favorite spot.